I'm gonna be honest, I don't even know how to start this video. You'll probably be wondering whether you've watched my videos or not. You'll see this video, and then you'll see the video that came before it, and you'll say, wow, that was a really long gap. Why did that happen? And there's multiple answers to that question. It's getting busy, it's mental health problems, it's just forgetting that YouTube existed and that I could put videos on YouTube. But I'll set the scene. I was watching another YouTuber's, a couple of her videos, Sarah Zed. I was watching specifically her Onceler history video, and then I came across her Homestuck history video. And when I saw the Homestuck one in my recommended, I realized, wait a minute, my 10-year anniversary is here. It was in vaguely September of 2012 that I started reading Homestuck. Or, I'll rephrase, I at least got into it. We'll get to that shortly. But it got me thinking about how much of my life and the fandom has changed, considering that I've been in and out of it for years. And no one can deny, even if you weren't in the fandom at all, even if you know absolutely nothing, nobody can deny the impact that it had on the internet. Now, at first my idea for this video was similar to Sarah Zed's in that I would just do my own version of the retelling of the history of the fandom. But then I realized that it wouldn't be good that way because I'm not really good with the technical stuff, all of the facts and everything. That's not really what I'm best at remembering. So then I thought I could just do the history of Homestuck, but from a more creative community member side of the story. Because I was very involved and active in the fandom in multiple different ways. And I had quite the experience, let's just put it that way. So, if you want like more of the scientific side and like the more heavily event-based side of the history, like the Sharpie Bath incident, the Kickstarter debacle, although I will be talking about that a bit. If you want all of that specific stuff, go watch Sarah Zed's video. It goes way further into detail than this will. But at the very least, the first thing I want to touch on is the stuff that everyone knows about, the things that are canon, and I wanted to specifically discuss how I connected to all of it. And boy did I do that. I was obsessed with Homestuck for a solid 5 years, I would say, before I really started to move on to other things. And then I got back into it for a little bit, and then I left again. So it takes a lot of effort for something to be able to pull me back into it. But it was kind of almost like my first real sense of community, because I liked things. I watched shows, I played games, like I still liked things. And I would even consider this, if you wanted to be specific, this wasn't even my first official, like, fandom that I found out about. The first ever fandom I would say that I discovered was Doctor Who. I started watching it when I was like 11. But it wasn't the reason that I started to want to be on the internet like I did for Homestuck. Getting into Homestuck was what basically made me want to start going on the internet, as me being the first generation of kids who had semi-easy access to the internet. So it was kind of the way that I learned my way around the internet, and it's the reason that nowadays I can do a multitude of things. And it was a very formative process for me, and I'm sure for other people. But at that particular age, finding out about Homestuck, or just content that was only consumed on the internet in general, was a very novel idea to me. And especially when I found out that there were other projects that happened before Homestuck. Like, when I read Problem Sleuth, like, shortly after I got into Homestuck, I read Problem Sleuth just because I was curious, you know? Like, this series that connected into the Homestuck canon, it would be cool to read it and figure out where all that little stuff originated. And I did, and it was fun. And it was just crazy to think about that. Especially because I joined at the height of the popularity of the fandom. 2012, right, that was the peak. We all know it was the peak. We can all agree that it was. So, in that respect, I look back on my time fairly fondly for the most part. Like, obviously there were some bad moments, but, like, I can't deny that Homestuck basically raised me, I would say. And that connects into a lot of how I've grown up, I think, because I remember reading into every update and getting super excited when a new one would come out, much like everybody else, and it was just this amazing sense of community. And it was the first time I ever had that kind of community, really, on such a large scale. Like, I obviously liked things before that. I was already being an artist. I was showing interest in animated shows already, but just that specific instance is what really heightened my experience enough to make me want to look for more things to be into. And I also think that today it's really funny how many different Act 5 jokes I can make. Oh, I can make 2 Act 5 jokes, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. And one of the most significant points, both in the fandom and in general, of the canon that I remember so clearly is the first time that I watched the S Cascade Flash, and sometimes even nowadays I go back and watch it just because it's so good. It's so raw. It really gives you the feeling of what the community felt like and what we did back in that day. And it's really, really cool to revisit. And people still revisit it, not just me. And then there's one more thing I want to talk about in terms of canon, Homestuck, and that's its connection to Undertale. Now, I know recent events, people are going to laugh about this portion, you know, but I still had to get it in there because it's part of the reason why I had such a big Undertale phase, because when I found out that Homestuck and Undertale were so connected in terms of staff and, like, themes and that kind of thing, I really enjoyed Undertale. And obviously Undertale is the less problematic version of Homestuck, I would say, honestly. Because it was made by a bunch of different people and had different processes. But, it was really interesting to get into Undertale after getting into Homestuck, and then realize that people were starting to call Megalovania the Sans song, but then me, with my veteran knowledge of Homestuck, I was like, no, that's actually a song from Homestuck that played for Vriska a lot. Like, it was, like, just one of those, like, back in my day moments, but it still was really interesting. It was kind of my first experience of feeling older than other people and other, like, young fans at the time. So it was very, very strange. Especially now, how often I experience that today, both in Homestuck and other things that I have since grown out of. But speaking of growing out of things, my next topic is about how my personal experience was in the fandom and how it made me grow as a person and how obsessed I was with it. I did so many different things. Let's see, I did fan art. I roleplayed both as canon trolls and as fan trolls. I made plenty of memes. There was even a period of time in high school when I was taking like music related classes, and I would make what I was inspired to think of as Homestuck music in GarageBand, thinking I might use it someday, and never did because I don't have a Apple product, so I can't download GarageBand on anything else, but it's fine. But like, and that, and just all of that kind of thing, I was always active, and then eventually I did start cosplaying too. So in terms of the community creative, I was very active and very invested. Like, I actually kind of became a little infamous in the role-playing community, specifically on Tumblr, for my very first ventral. If you recognize this character, then yeah, that was mine. She was mine. She became a very infamous character because when I would roleplay as her, she would only mostly seek out the Violet Bloods. And I, for the most part, got like kind of bullied for it. Just because they're like, oh, you look out. Only goes after, but it was really just because they were my favorite characters at the time, and this was a fan troll that I made to be kind of self-indulgent. Because it was also right around the time that I was like, my sexuality was starting to flux a little bit, so she was almost like my ideal picture of myself at the time, before I knew anything else, obviously. And it was kind of just like a method of self-projection. I would always seek out all my favorite characters and have her interact with them and all of that kind of thing. But she wasn't the only one I made. I made dozens more. Dozens. And it was just a very fun part of my experience. Especially because when the Gigapause happened, and I don't know if anybody remembers this. If you do, you apply for quite the veterans discount. During the Gigapause, there was a website someone made called gigapause.com, which was basically like Facebook, but like role-playing / just for Homestuck fans in general, and it was so nice. It was just a fun little way to talk to each other and roleplay and have fun while we waited for the pause to end. And it was actually where I met and started my first and only relationship so far. So I look back on that very fondly. I have almost no negative experiences from that I can even remember. It was just a really good time for me personally in terms of that. Obviously, life isn't perfect, and it never was for me. But having that sense of community again, especially when we went without content for a year and a half or more, it was really nice to have that. And like the factual side of things and like all those big events kind of tied into my experience too. Like I remember seeing, like, I remember joining the fandom and finding out that it had been going since 2009, and I was like, oh my god, I'm 3 years late? That's insane. I wonder when it's gonna end. And then sure enough, it ends when I'm in high school, which I thought was kind of crazy. Like, one period of my life is getting so much closer to ending, and this thing that I have known for years is about to end too. Or so I thought. We'll get to that. But it was just very symbolistic, I guess. And then one other experience that I've had, very uniquely, is I went to my first convention. It wasn't a big one. It was a very, very small local convention about 15 minutes away from me in a library, and it was so small. Like, the list of guests, it was just like some very obscure comic artists and stuff, I think there was like one guy who worked on like Adventure Time or something. It was stuff like that where you're just kind of like, oh, that's cool, but it's not any big names or that kind of thing. And I remember I went with my best friend that got me into Homestuck and their other friend. And the three of us went. I don't think we were all in cosplay. No, I think we were. They were cosplaying Gamzee. I was doing a really, really shitty cosplay of Aridin because that was like before my first official cosplay, so I was not equipped for it. And then I think the friend, she was cosplaying somebody else. I can't remember for the light of me, but and I remember going and we actually saw other Homestuck cosplayers, and it was really funny because this had to have been 2014, 2015, which was, as most of you would know, especially if you watch Sarah Zed's video, that was kind of when the fandom was starting to dwindle just a little bit. Like, it was on the tail end of falling down in population, so it was really comforting in a way, and really awesome to see other people showing up in cosplay and being like, oh my gosh, hey! And I still have pictures with them, and it was fun, even though it was a small, tiny convention. All we did was hang out with them for a couple hours and took some other pictures with other people, and that was it. But it was still, I'm glad that my first con experience was that small, and I wasn't unfortunate enough to have gone to a big convention and had something super weird or dramatic happen. Now we have to talk about the most significant part of the fandom is its fall. Which, if you want the specifics of this section, go watch Sarah Zed's video, because I am definitely gonna miss a lot of important details. But it'll be fine. Now, I personally fell off of Homestuck when it ended, for the most part. Like, by that point, I was still invested in it, of course, but I was starting to get into other things. I was watching some more anime, I was trying to get around and play some more games, I was even reading books. Like, I was broadening my horizons, but I would still visit Homestuck pretty frequently. But then after Homestuck ended, I wasn't the only one that kind of dwindled away. But, it was when the epilogues were announced that things really took a deep, dark turn. I remember reading, I think I read Candy first, and oh boy, it was not good. No. This was also, like, the latest into my high school experience it could have possibly been. I was just about to get out of high school. It was not, and it just wasn't good. Now that I had grown up and learned more about what's around me and my environment and figured out more about me in general, it just felt strange that they decided to bring Homestuck back in a way that contradicts what everybody else wanted. Like, the whole point of an epilogue is to show what happened after the closure of your story, and maybe give some characters a few extra arcs, or show the ones who took so long to earn their happiness, just soak in it for a little while. And the epilogues were not that at all. If anything, it was the opposite. It was undoing a lot of character development. Nothing was fun. There was some comedy spliced in there, but it was just mostly people not having a good time. And me included, fans didn't like it. And I was not the only one. In my circle of friends, 99% of us did not like the epilogues. I disliked it so much that I didn't even finish reading them. I'm pretty sure I read most of Candy, and then I stopped reading it altogether. And I was like, I don't care if meat is better or worse, I just can't do it. And then, when we thought it couldn't get any worse, Homestuck 2. This was at the point where even I was starting to think, why are they still trying to continue this? Like, the official comic ended in 2016. It doesn't need to keep going. It had a fine ending. Some people may not have liked it, but it was still good enough for how long it went on. And it just slowly got worse and worse and worse. I remember specifically what made me stop reading Homestuck 2 was when they decided to not put trigger warnings on each chapter. Because what they would do was at the beginning of each chapter, they would just give a quick little message at the top with trigger warnings of whatever might be in that chapter. Like, oh, this chapter talks about eating disorders or suicide or what have you. They used to do that for any page that was needed. But then at one point, they just said, no, we're not going to do that anymore. And I just could not understand it, both from a business standpoint and a caring about your community standpoint. Because the whole point of warning people about a trigger is so that they feel comfortable. And it's also not even just to warn people who won't want to see it at all. The warning helps because then some people might be able to handle it depending on the context. Like for me, I personally always need incest and pedophilia tagged because they just make me so physically uncomfortable. But depending on the context, and if I know about it ahead of time, I can usually get through it without feeling sick, or leaving or giving up on the show entirely or whatever. Just that warning is so much better for most people, and the fact that they just decided on a whim to not do that anymore kind of frustrated me. But that wasn't really the only reason, obviously, that it was bad. It was also bad just because, like, the characterizations were all off, and it was just not good plot, really. The art was nice. I really liked the art they did for the most part, but it wasn't consistent either, like Homestuck was. Even in the epilogues, the quality was consistent. Even though it was consistently bad, it was still consistent in that, oh, this part is bad, so this part's probably going to be bad too, and it was. And it's just all spiraled, and it really made my opinion of Homestuck quite negative, to the point that after I came back and had a bit of a mini Homestuck phase again in 2018, I ended it in like mid-2019, and I haven't really been back since, except for Hive Swap. That is the main exception that I've had. And that's going to be the next topic here. Because Hive Swap is such a can of worms that I didn't even know existed until a few years ago. Obviously, if you know your history, Hive Swap is actually the project that ended up as a product of the famous $2.5 million Kickstarter from 2012, and the fact that the game did not come out until, 2018? When they promised it would come out in 2014 originally? Yeah. And after having learned everything that I could about it from Sarah Zed's follow-up video where she nearly got sued for her Homestuck history video, I recommend you watch that one as well. It's very insightful. There was a lot of underlying issues among the staff, any of the staff for Homestuck, whether it be people working with Andrew Hussey or people just working at What Pumpkin. It was just very over the top and all over the place, and it was insane to learn about. I can give the long and short of it, but basically it was just there was some problematic, bad people who were in the company, and due to that, they caused not an uproar, but just a lot of inconsistencies in the work process, and it led to a lot of firing and undeserved hiring, and in turn, the game was just delayed so much that it couldn't actually get worked on until, like, 2015, not around that time, I think. I'm paraphrasing that estimate, but you get the idea. It took them a long time to make the game just because they were having a lot of issues behind the scenes. And finding all of this out, and then especially finding out even more of the backstory behind it, how many people were wrongfully fired from the job, how many people were almost not credited for their job, and how many people were just treated horribly. It was appalling. And for the briefest of seconds, it made me feel bad for having bought both of the games and for playing them, but then I had to remind myself, no, if anything, you're supporting the people who helped work on the game, and that's the best that I can do, as someone who isn't even in the fandom anymore, which is true. And I think that's also part of the reason that Homestuck 2 performed so badly, is that at least the Hive Swap team still had some people from the original Homestuck team, whereas Homestuck 2 was almost entirely fan-based. It was high-profile fans creating that, including one that I'm sure if you were on Homestuck Twitter when Homestuck 2 was airing updates, you know who I'm talking about. But it was almost like showing what was wrong and showing why Homestuck 2 failed, whereas Hive Swap has so much potential to do better, and it has. I love starting off a fresh new story with fresh new characters, but it's still in a universe that you're familiar with. It's really fun, and I love it, and I love the style of the game too. If you haven't played part 1 or part 2, act 2 of Hive Swap, it's chock full of references, and it's really fun, and I cannot wait to find out when part 3 is coming, because I don't think they've given us news on that. But it was just crazy to think about that comparison, and how Homestuck 2 basically led to the death of the fandom. Like, I wouldn't say nobody's in the fandom anymore. I have seen people still talking about Homestuck on the internet. Only Twitter for the most part, but, like, people still talk about it, create content. It's still there. But it is definitely not in its heyday anymore, and I don't think it ever will be again. Even with Hive Swap. Even if Hive Swap finishes up their releases and it's the best game ever, it wins best game of the year, it still won't be at the peak. And I just, hearing about the Kickstarter and the Hive Swap thing, finding all of that information out was what really tanked my opinion. Like, remember how I said that how bad Homestuck 2 was tanking my opinion of Homestuck in general? But then finding out all of the other legal stuff behind it is what really disappointed me. Like, Sarah Zed's second video, following up the history video, I read almost every word that she exchanged with Andrew Hussey. And to see Andrew Hussey just straight up lie to her, insult her, and just, like, not answer any of her questions, despite her being so professional about it all, it was just really disheartening to see. From someone who grew up with this series and considers it a part of my life permanently. And altogether, it just my opinion of Homestuck isn't what it used to be. Sure, I still acknowledge how it got me through some of my toughest years, and it really helped me grow in certain ways. Like, my art has gotten better since then. My cosplay skill has improved greatly. I consider myself a lot better at talking to people now, and all of that doesn't make up for all the bad things that happened both in the comic and behind the scenes, I feel like. Including the inclusivity. It was just, I remember originally that was my selling point for people, was that at the time, for the time frame that Homestuck was most popular in, 2012, around that time, for that period of time, Homestuck was pretty damn good about inclusivity and representing minorities. Because back then you didn't see a lot, and if you did, they were all pretty mediocre. And now I realize that Homestuck, in compared to other things, is a mediocre media with representation. But at the time, it was good enough. It was enough that it got the attention of so many young queer kids, whether they knew they were queer already or they didn't find out until later like I did. It was kind of a stepping stone for a lot of kids and a lot of teenagers. Because I think if I hadn't gotten into Homestuck when I did, I probably wouldn't have found out anything about my identity for at least another couple of years. Because Homestuck was the reason I got on the internet. So, by that logic, it all adds up. If I hadn't gotten onto the internet, I wouldn't have found other things. And if I hadn't found other things, I wouldn't have found other friends with other experiences. And it just keeps going and going. And for all of that, I thank my best friend right now, Sky. It was early in 7th grade. We had gotten a few new kids in the school from other school districts. And my current best friend had walked in one day into homeroom and said, "You remind me of this character Carcat from Homestuck." Yes, that is how it happened. I was told that I was a Carcat Kenny at age 12, and I went with it. And to this day, he is still on my kin list for some reason. But I digress. It's that sense of nostalgia that really keeps it alive for me today. It's probably the only reason I still talk about it at all. If I didn't have such a nostalgia for the series, then I probably wouldn't talk about it ever again. It's just like, it's that important to my history as a person. Now, the last thing I wrote on here, on my little outline for this video, is just to throw in any other fun facts that I had about my experience or anything else. And I will say, first of all, this shirt that I'm wearing is also from my best friend Sky, hand-me-down. They didn't want it anymore, so I was like, sure, I'll take it, why not? Even though I think I took it in like 2016, once I was starting to fade out of my interest, but I digress. And there's another thing that reminded me about my anniversary was, I was on TikTok recently, and I was on the For You page, obviously, because heaven forbid, nothing normal can ever happen on the For You page. And what showed up on my feed but someone posting a clip of the very infamous Manicro animatic video. You know the one. If you know, you know. And it caused such a visceral reaction in me as someone who was one of the biggest fans of the Emporas, honestly, in that I have an Aridin pillow over there, like his silhouette with the wand. It's over on my bed. I'm not gonna go show you, but my point is that this reminded me about my anniversary because I opened the comments out of curiosity, and there was a comment that said, wait, are people gonna start simping for him now? And I felt my bones creaking, okay? I was like, now? Where were you 7 years ago when I would want fake cigarettes? I would want those candy cigarettes just to pretend that it was his and I was mine, and I remember screaming. It was just it put into perspective how long I've been here, that I was like, wait, that doesn't happen anymore? People didn't know about this? And it blew my mind, really. I don't know what to tell you. Yeah. And I think it was really funny, too, when I started making fan trolls. Because I made this fan troll in particular, like I said, as kind of a inflated self-image of myself, what I idealized myself to be, and it was a way to project myself into the universe that I was so into. But then, as I was obviously figuring out my gender, I realized this was just an attempt to over-feminize myself. And meanwhile, my body actually wasn't gonna do that at all. I never liked wearing dresses. I was very hesitant to wear a skirt unless I absolutely loved it. Like, it should have been a sign, honestly. How I didn't pick up on it until I graduated high school, I couldn't tell you, but it was that and many other ways that Homestuck did something significant to me in my life. Whether it be that, or whether it be my sense of humor, or whether it be my preferred way to consume media, which is on the internet, or on a screen of some kind. And it just really meant something to me. And every once in a while, I'll talk about my experiences. I'll look fondly back on my role-playing days and be like, oh, I remember MSPRP. Where I'll say, oh yeah, I remember that time that I tried to cosplay that character. Or I'll remember a conversation that I had with another fan. Or I'll remember all the thousands and thousands of YouTube videos that to this day my YouTube will still recommend me. Like, I put together a playlist for a Discord server I'm in, because we do presentation nights pretty frequently. We've done at least 3 at this point, and the presentation that I just finished for our next one is ranking all of my past and present cringe interests. I managed to make it a very small list, because there aren't many of my current interests that are considered cringe, but it's mostly old fandoms that I was in or still have some kind of connection to but don't talk about. And Homestuck was obviously on the list. And after weighing it, it ended up as number 1 on my list because it was the one that I had for the longest besides Dan and Phil. It was the one that basically formulated how I talk and how my brain works. It was the one that helped me find out so many different things about me. It was the one that made me start drawing a lot more. Like, I drew quite a bit, but once I got into Homestuck is when I really started to draw a lot, and in turn made my art style grow as I got older. And because of that, and then the mix of how formative it was to the internet in general, that's what pushed it up to number 1, despite all of its flaws. And trust me, I do mention that. And I made a playlist to kind of sample it, because some of the fandoms on the list, including Homestuck, are ones that some of my friends in that server aren't a part of, or weren't a part of, or aren't as familiar with. So I decided to make a playlist of one video per each one. There was 10 total for the list, and Homestuck was number 1. So I did it in order, and the Homestuck video that I put on was the parody we all know and love of "We Didn't Start the Fire," but it's "You Can't Fight the Homestuck." I still know all the lyrics. I checked. I know them all. It's still one of the most iconic Homestuck videos. I think it's at like 4.5 million views at this point. It's undeniably probably the most famous cover, I would say. There's a lot of other famous videos that have gotten a lot of views, but that's the one that any fan could probably recognize. And in general, I don't know how to feel about Homestuck anymore. I don't. Remembering the fun times is so nice, but then I remember all the prejudice and the bullying and the fandom having other problems that I wasn't involved with. I couldn't even imagine what it was like for that. As far as I'm concerned, I was probably lucky. All I really got was getting bullied for having a Mary Sue fan troll and having a fan troll that picked favorites. That was really all I got, truthfully. Which still wasn't great. I mean, it absolutely fucked up parts of my brain that I'm still trying to unlearn. But it was just more of a mixed bag than I thought it was. And after learning everything about the Kickstarter, and after how bad the most recent Homestuck content besides Hive Swap was, it's just really put it into perspective for me. Because I'm not good with change. Things change and it scares me. As you can see, my room is pretty barren, and that's because we're literally moving in like 5 weeks. This is probably going to be the last video that's ever in this room. Because I thought it would be a good idea to move with my parents to South Carolina. And leaving my second job after I got this new job, and still in the closet, and it's just a lot. Change is a lot. And it's almost harder in your fandoms and the things that you enjoy, because that's almost your escape. That's your escape from real life, so you don't want it to change, even more so than you would want something to change in your life. And I think that's what's most terrifying about how quickly Homestuck fell. And sometimes I fear that the things I'm into now are gonna fall just as quickly. Luckily now, though, I have consumed so much more content. I have a multitude of things to choose from. My favorite, the thing that I've been now hooked on for 2 years, is A3. I watch so much anime. Like, I frequently watch stuff. I'm watching a lot of other, like, live action shows. Currently I'm trying to catch up on Supergirl. I'm even broadening my horizons with music. It's just, as long as you keep your brain busy, it'll be okay, I think. And I think that's really what Sarah Zed's video made me think about the most, is that no matter what changes, you can always rely on your interests and things you enjoy to keep you afloat. And even if they've changed, even if they suck now and they didn't before, or even if they were bad before and they're even worse, it's just the sense of nostalgia that you might get from something that can really help you hold on to it and keep you afloat in life, because God knows sometimes it feels like we're all sinking, especially lately with the state of the world we're in. and the fear of God in us when we don't know what's next, both for the world and for just us as people. I'm gonna be honest, after recent reproductive news, I'm not thrilled about us moving to one of the states where it's no longer legal to have an abortion, but it's not permanent. I'm considering it a way to broaden my horizons and look for other things to do and see, and hopefully we all feel that way about our interests, that we can move on from them but still consider them special, because I definitely still consider Homestuck special, even after all of this, even after how much pain it has caused me and how much it's caused others. I can still look back on it fondly and crack jokes and even consume content every once in a while, depending on how I'm feeling. And that's really the most important part. After 10 years, it really starts to sink in, you know? I don't think I can really add anything else to that. I will say to any new fans of Homestuck who are reading it on their weird other websites now that Flash is dead and you have to find other strange ways to read the comic, as much as I joke about you shouldn't read it, if you do read it, then, well, I hope you enjoy it, and I hope it does something for you like it did for me and so many other people. Let me show off one more picture as a kind of send-off. Let's see. Where is the one? Oh, I want to find the one. Give me the one. I'll show this just to give you a hint of how active I was in creating. This was a bunch of different fan trolls that I made. Here's my main girl up here, her ancestor, some other friends. I even made an off-based one at one point because I liked that game. It's just really, it changed me, and although there was a lot of cringe, I'm also kind of grateful for it. And we all should be. So, if you watched, thank you for watching, and I highly recommend that before or after you watch this video, whichever you prefer, you go watch both of Sarah Zed's videos. I will link them in the description if I can, depending on how well of a description I make for this video in general. But I highly recommend watching her videos. It has a lot more technical stuff that you can connect and learn about and then come watch my video, or you can watch this one first to get the bare bones of those facts and then find out the specifics over there. It doesn't matter either way, because I just wanted to credit her in some way for giving me the inspiration to make this video, because I definitely would not have been able to do all of the scientific stuff. I can barely remember what I ate for lunch last week. Heaven forbid all these facts that I didn't even know about. Like, she talked about a lot of events and in the fandom, and most of them I knew about. I would say I knew about 85-90% of what she talked about in the video. Most of my expertise was lacking in terms of the Kickstarter and the story of Hive Swap, which is obviously stuff that happened when I was still early into the fandom and didn't know as much as I know now. But it really It's a good video to watch, even if you're not into Homestuck and you're just curious as to why the fandom was like that, or why the comic was like that, why it took the internet by storm for some reason. But, yeah. This might be the last time this YouTube channel even sees this house, honestly. But if you did watch, thank you for watching, and have a good life.